Okay, so chapter 44 is a completely new chapter. I kind of had this idea in my head what I wanted to do next, but the chapter wasn't there. I don't know if there was a chapter like it in the original version. I'm sure that there was something like it, but I don't remember, and I don't have the chapter anymore. So this is a completely new chapter. And I started to count the words, and I haven't counted the whole book. I've counted up to chapter 25, and up to chapter 25 I have 52,000 words. So this book will definitely be over 100,000. When I originally wrote it, it was like 120,000 words. I don't know if this will be longer or shorter. I have added, but I've also cut out a great deal of stuff that, too dramatic, too melodramatic, too stupid, just, so I have cut out stuff. So it would be better if I could make it not be anything above 120,000 words. But anyway, we'll see. So here it is, chapter 44. Song of Mornius, chapter 44. Over here, master! Grevlin saw the child prodding the hardened sand with his stick, pounding furiously where the trail of granules sluggishly zigzagged. Expertly now, Cray stabbed ahead of the line to cut the creature off, and from the icy gray sand came the swift ejection of water. Cray squealed with excitement as Grevlin hunkered down, striking quickly with his pointed-nosed shovel. With his free hand he dug deep then, seized the slippery shell cone with his questing fingers and dragged it out. With a squelching splash the rubbery body hit the crowded interior of his lidded bucket. Sails! Grevlin peered at his catch and then thumbed the lid shut. I cannot recall when I last hunted so well. Your eyes are keen, little human. It behooves me to have your sight so much closer to the ground. Walking around him in a circle, Cray kept his gaze fixed on the frosted sand. You mean it's good I'm small? He asked. Then Grevlin saw the child peering worriedly down the misty, ice-glazed beach to the huddle of giant children watching them. Indeed it is, Grevlin said. You and I make a formidable team. Come. Grevlin, unable to hold the child's hand as he wished, bent and with his free arm scooped the child up. From the crook of his elbow, Cray scrambled up his shoulder like Grevlin had so often seen ponies ferret do. Then the child straddled his neck from behind, with both hands grasping his hair. Walking with his back bent against the wind and occasional snowflakes, Grevlin aimed for the rocky outline of Hathra's massive cliff, and the line of modest stone homes crouched within its shelter. Even from here he could tell his from the others by the row of seashell wind chimes blowing beside the doorway, chimes his daughter had made to beckon him home from the angry sea. He frowned as he neared, seeing the dark silhouette of a figure beside the door, outlined by the snowy drifts and the candlelight burning behind his front window's frosty glass. Trenter crunched through the snow out to meet him, the leader's burly arms swinging along in his confident, familiar saunter. Grevlin watched the larger giant's face swim into focus through the dawn's swirling mist, saw the glower on his face, his fierce brown eyes fixed upward at the child. There is a conclave that requires your immediate presence, Master Second, Trenter began formally. He stopped beside Grevlin, and after a pause his big hand lifted. Grevlin held very still as Trenter reached past his cheek. With a dignified nod, the leader gently caught the little boy's hand with his gloved fingers and shook it gravely. I am Leader Trenter, he said. I bid you welcome to Hathra Isle, young human. Grevlin felt the child trembling behind his neck, felt the cold little hands slide under his hair to hug him tight. He is frightened, Trenter said quietly. He stepped back, and Grevlin caught the full bristled serving of his glare. I must ask why he is here. You risk much, Master Second, and that includes his life. The gathering is to discuss this very thing, Master. Is there a place he can be placed while we meet?" Grevlin shook his head and glowered into Trenter's face. His leader was younger, yet the eldest son of Thresher Gavorian who heard the Black Sword's call. All his life, Trenter had enjoyed the awe and respect of his giants. There had never once been a challenge to his leadership. Grevlin doubted there ever would be. "I vowed he would not leave my sight, Trenter," Grevlin said, raising his voice above a sudden blast of snow-heavy wind. "He is Pony's ward. You know how Pony can be." Reaching out, the younger giant firmly gripped Grevlin's arm. "Come, ere this winter blows the child away. Our giants gather in Freedom Hall." Grevlin trotted over the frozen sand and patches of ice, his bucket of sea cones banging at his thigh, while behind, worming his neck, the little boy huddled. Up the cliff's steep, slippery stair he scrambled after Trenter, the leader's wavy black hair whipping back, his tattered white and gray wolf's cloak rippling up from his massive shoulders. Grevlin caught a glimpse of the leader's wide belt under the fur, the symbol of the great sword stamped deep into the brown leather. Above the cliff, the crystal walls of Freedom Hall stood blazing yellow and pink reflections of the dawn beneath the falling snow. The ice gathered during the night, melting in the sunlight, rippling water down its walls. Blindingly bright, it crouched on the cliff like a beacon of hope to all people, visible from every corner of Hothrahone Isle. During the day it glowed golden from the sun, by night the companion's silvery sheen. Inside, the crystal structure glowed warm with light and life. It was a living fortress of magic-touched stone. Grevlin entered the hall's glittering entrance behind his leader. How he wished for a moment to speak to the child, prepare the little boy for the hostility he was bound to face. But Trenter beat him to it. Pausing halfway across the foyer's floor of white marble, the leader swung around and came back. In 2 massive strides he reached Grevlin's side, and from the corner of his eye Grevlin saw his leader gently lift the little boy's chin. "Remember who you are," Trenter told Cray sternly. "It is not for these great brutes to say, for they know you not. They will be angry, but never at you. You, little human, have done nothing wrong. You can?" When Cray spoke, it was almost a whimper. "Yes." Trenter winced. He stepped back and nodded to Grevlin. "I called this meeting myself, Master Second, as I seek to bury this matter in the sea. I like it not, but what is necessary is not always pleasant." Grevlin nodded. After a pause he bent slowly to set his bucket down on the pristine white marble. Then he reached up. With both hands he caught at Cray's shoulders and gently lifted him forward over his head. Cradling the child, Grevlin peered down at the stark look of fear on his face. "Keep watching me," Grevlin told him softly. "Soon this will end, and we can resume our day just as we planned." He looked up at the question on Trenter's expressive face. "We have an appointment with Stitch after we break our fast," Grevlin explained to his leader. "He has agreed to fashion warmer garments for the boy. Whether or not he is allowed to remain on Hothra, the boy has nothing to wear. Pony is dear to me, but he knows naught of fatherhood." At that, Trenter snorted, then gestured him forward through the hall's main arch and into its largest chamber. Around the elaborately carved dais and leader's seat stood in a loose circle 9 stone chairs, 3 to the east, west, and south, representing the 3 corners of Hothra Isle. The seated giants rose to their feet as Trenter entered, stood waiting as he sauntered past and mounted the stair. 5 of the attendants were senior captains, representing Hothra's productive fisher trade. 2 were the commanders from Hothra's huge warships, there to speak for Hothra's warriors. The last 2 were politicians, the governor of Hothra and the short, burly giant who was Hothra's sheriff. Grevlin knew every face, and yet now they were changed. Grevlin saw mistrusting eyes flinch from the child, glowering hard at the floor, or their hands, or even the walls to hide their fear. "Master Second," Trenter called formally from his seat on the dais, "may you and your guests be welcome at Freedom Hall." At the sound of his voice, at once the 9 giants looked up. relief naked on their faces as they were given something else to focus on. Trenter nodded to them briefly. I have only allowed this assembly so that you may see for yourself the human among us, Trenter said sternly to the upturned faces. I grow weary of your frantic petitions requesting the child's removal. As you now see, he is not but a little child. He cannot and will not harm any of us. Sledgefist, Hathra's sheriff, nodded once toward Grevlin. I have no problem with the little one, he said, but I fear for his safety, and of course potential riots. Regrettably, we cannot reassure every giant on Hathra. Nor do we have the benefit of a winged elf mage to ease our hurt, Leader Second, the sheriff added, turning in his seat to meet Grevlin's stare. For most of us, the word human conjures much that is painful. We think slaver. Many of us still feel the whip. A human child is no match for an enraged giant, I fear. I will be happy to remain on my ship, one of the fisher captains broke in. Grevlin, still standing by the door where Trenter left him, recognized him as Euphelius, the grizzled captain of the Deluge, Hathra's largest fisher vessel. I do not see this child now, he growled. I will not see him ever. He is a human. I vow to never endure such creatures again. Grevlin lowered his head to smile reassuringly at Cray. The little boy was huddled down in his grasp and moaning softly, face pressed tight against his chest. As the child shook his head, Grevlin saw streaks of tears running down his cheek. This will not be born, Grevlin heard himself mutter. He looked up. All the giants turned toward him, with Trenter above raising questioning brows. He is a child, not a creature, Grevlin snapped, and you lot are making him cry. I shall take my leave of you. Cray and I have a nice day planned. Decide whatever you will, Leader Trenter. Frankly, I care not. Grevlin! Trenter called from his perch above the others as he slowly stood. Wait! By the chamber's crystal door, Grevlin stopped. Fuming, he faced the shimmering glass and waited. This is not about deciding anything, Trenter said quietly. It's about promoting understanding. If these giants are reassured, mayhap they will pass it on so their people or crews will be also. Grevlin glanced down at Cray. The little boy was looking up, rubbing his fists across his cheeks to dry his tears. Can I? Cray whispered the words. Please tell them something, he asked. Grevlin stared at the boy. You need not defend yourself, little human. As Trenter said, you have done nothing wrong. Please. Cray squirmed in his arms. When that didn't work, he slumped back in defeat and looked up imploringly. Grevlin turned and slowly approached the dais. Eyes ahead, neither looking left or right, he strode between the chairs and stopped below the raised platform. Then slowly he turned. This child has asked for the right to be heard, he said gruffly, staring over the suspicious faces of the captains and politicians. Then he looked down. Cray? The child pointed past his head to the dais behind him. Put me there, he whispered, so they can see me. Grevlin nodded. Turning again, he gripped the little boy under his arms, then lifted him up, setting him on his feet before Trenter. Beside the leader, the boy barely reached the height of Trenter's knees. He wavered a moment on his feet, blinking in the shaft of light beaming through the hall's crystal roof. Then he peered downward at his audience, while behind him Trenter quietly reseated himself. I am Cray Middleton, he said proudly in his piping voice. I am a citizen of the town Pharanth in the land of Thalos. I watched my father die. His voice faltered, and Grevlin saw him rubbing at his tears. I watched our house burn up. He shook his head and looked down for a moment. Then he turned and walked to where the other seated giants could see him. I have been living in a cave up on the mountain with Pony. He has told me a lot about magic. He told me what magic did to you, what bad humans did with magic to giants. He says it's like when I dream about monsters, but then I wake up. He says you never do. Trembling now, Cray turned to look at Trenter, who was smiling down. nodding his encouragement. Cray turned back, and now his tears streamed fast down his cheeks. "Wish I had magic to help you wake up," he whispered. "Good magic. Then I could help people. I'd help you get fish," he said to the fisher captains. "And you to be safe," he added to the commanders. "And I'd help make your gardens get big. I'd make your sick people better, too." He swallowed and rubbed at his face. "Then I'd help you see that I am good." He looked downward, meeting Grevelin's smile. "But I can't help," he whispered. "I don't have anything." Grevelin lifted his arms, and Cray shuffled forward, pressed his face trustingly against his chest. Cradling the small human, Grevelin nodded up at Trenter, flicked a glare at the assembled giants. Then he turned. Ignoring the awkward and astonished expressions of his peers, he strode with the little boy boldly out the door. "You." Grevelin shook his head as he carried the boy down Freedom Hall's outer steps, his bucket of sea cones tapping at his thigh. "Did I say too much?" Cray asked softly. No." Gently he stroked the boy's bangs from his eyes. "You spoke very well, little Cray." Grevelin stopped at the great cliff's edge. Downward he stared at Hathra's U-shaped harbor studded with piers along one side, its black water clogged with boats and ships. Past the harbor, the Dawn Cutter sat anchored, its silhouette shaped like a sword. Serenely it floated on ribbons of gold cast on the water from the rising sun. He imagined his brother somewhere within its hull, imagined Kurganrock sitting down with the camaraderie of his crew at mess, perhaps enjoying his favorite breakfast of gull eggs, cheese, and buttered toasted bread. "Are you hungry?" he asked the child, looking down. "I am hungry." He licked his lips. "I am famished." "Me too!" Craig turned in his arms to look out at the sea. "I've never had sea cones before." "Not just the cones," Grevelin said. "I make a perfect blending with onion, egg, and reefweed." Grevelin smiled. "You and I are on our way to a feast this morning, Cray, a feast where we shall dine like kings." Laughing, Cray threw his arms wide as if to embrace the sea. "Like kings!" he shouted. Grinning, Grevelin moved to the steep stair along the cliff and started down. Then he heard from behind him Trenter's voice stopping him, calling him. "Wait," he whispered down at Cray. Then he turned and stepped back to the icy rim above the stair. His wolf fur blowing back from his shoulders, Trenter hurried up, his big feet crunching the snow. "Good news," Trenter said. He nodded back at the hall, then ran his big hand through the thick blowing mass of his black hair. "His words have touched their hearts, Grev." Trenter, smiling, looked down with affection at the little boy. "Did you hear me?" he asked gently. "You have touched their granite hearts, little human. They are moved still, beyond words, when little on this big world can so move them." Grevelin nodded. "So, is this matter now buried as you hoped?" he asked, meeting Trenter's incredulous eyes. "They will let this child be?" "I honestly believe now in this moment," Trenter said slowly, "they would happily surrender their lives to defend this child. Of course that will fade soon enough, as these feelings always do. Their memories will not be so easily unarmed. But I believe the words they heard today will also be remembered." Trenter smiled down at Cray. "You, little human friend, are welcome to stay on my island for as long as you wish." "Good." Grevelin returned his leader's smile. He glanced down. Then with a grunt he hefted his heavy bucket, held it level with Trenter's nose. "We did quite well in our quest this morning," he said. He laughed then, hearing the sudden growl from Trenter's flat stomach. "Care to break fast with us, leader, first?" Trenter lifted the lid to peer inside. "An impressive effort," he acknowledged with a nod. Then, with pretended seriousness, he peered down into Grevelin's arms at Cray. "But I have to wonder," he said gravely, "will this friend of giants deign to share his kingly feast?" With a happy smile, Cray beamed into the leader's stern face, his eyes glistening bright. "Yes, I will," he said with a laugh.